Hello folks, I'm L.A. Little and this is the weekly NeoTA wrap. We take a look at these markets and we do it from a neoclassical perspective. Each time we ask ourselves what happened last week and what does it tell us about the coming ones. I do the show not four times, I do it once a week every Sunday night. Broadcast at or before 10 o'clock Eastern Time. I archive it on YouTube. It's under the channel L.A. Little. You can catch it there each Sunday evening. Last week, markets. Let's pop into that real quick here. Pretty much flat. The only thing that really showed up last week was the NASDAQ. NASDAQ pops 1.2%. Everything else fairly flat, totally flat on the Russell. You know, year to date, still some decent gains after the big push up over the last month. And, you know, that's kind of where it stands at. With respect to the general markets. If we look underneath, right, go inside and start looking at this, you've had a huge run, folks. I mean, by any stretch of the imagination, this was a huge run, spectacular, if you will, straight off the bottom, right? You go from, and we're looking at the S&P on the weekly, you go from 1821 roughly up to 2046. So you pick up 220 points. That's something like 13-14% in a straight up manner over a 5-week period, really over a 4-week period, and no cares whatsoever about that big volume low. It never came back, never even started to even attempt to come back. Instead, it just simply stair-stepped higher. You can see it here on the daily. Stair-stepped higher, no return, right? Straight up. Now, that doesn't mean that you know, there's anything to keep this from coming back to this level, and I suspect at some point it will come back there again. But right now, that's not the question. The question is, how far can it go? And if and when it retraces, how does it behave? If we look at it on the weekly, your weekly retest regenerate zone bullish is off this swing point high, and it's the top and the bottom of that high. And if we look at those numbers, you know, the top is roughly 2019 actually, bottom's 1978. If you stay over at more than 6 bars, then you can only expect probably the top to get tested, but I doubt it's going to stay over at 6 bars. I suspect you're going to see it come back sooner than that. And I also expect that this week probably has the best probability of that occurring. So 2019, we're trading right now at 2039, so we're only talking about 20 points to get back and do a retest and attempt to regenerate in a bullish manner. Now, if it were to do that and not make a new high first, so in other words, let's say tomorrow it actually starts down with a 2046 top, then you could start thinking about ABCD type projections. And these are huge projections if they in fact develop. Now let's just take the worst case and say that it does a full retest regen and then does a projection back to the top side. Well, even that worst case, in other words, coming all the way down, still that would be 1820 up to 2046. So we're talking about 220 points. And then tack it back on to, let's say, the top of this bar. Let's just use the bottom of that one. So 220 onto that gets you up to what? Almost 2200. That's another 160 points from where we are now. And if it pulls back, it's going to be, you know, 200 plus points. So you can see that we're talking about an extremely large ABCD structure to the upside if in fact that's the way it plays out. I say this is the week that you have the best chance, or the market has the best chance of coming back, and that is because this market is starting to flatten out after a huge run, right? And you can see it just starting to roll over here. The more immediate retest regen would be off the prior swing point high that had already been tested right here. And so that, in other words, to come back in here and test it again, that would be kind of a key area that you would expect it to try to hold. The bottom there is 20 so 2006 as the low, and so a pullback into that area, from these highs around 240, that would be the area that you would expect this to hold. That would also be a bullish retest regenerate on the weekly. So for me, I would be looking for that type of a pullback, maybe another full retest. And again, 2006, and we're currently trading, we closed at 2040 roughly. So, 34 points, I guess, 34 points to the downside. Note that you've had basically four dojis in a row. In other words, you can't get higher, you can't get lower. It's just a stalemate at this price point. And if you look at any of these indexes, and I'm just going to flip through them quickly here. We'll look at the Dow next. The Dow pushes higher. We have no failures on any of these at this point. So you saw the S&P, there was the Dow. Here's the NASDAQ composite itself, which picked up this week. The NDX, which also pushed up this week. The only one that didn't push up was the Russell. Russell went up, tested the high. 1.4 there did 1.6, so you test with more volume, but you close under it. Test failure, but more volume, says you can come right back into it again. That high, 1183. The close was 1173, so only 10 points away. But the Russell would be the one that I would be watching for any kind of clues, because the Russell, on the downside, the Russell has been the cleanest indicator all year long. And so that's the one I would be looking at and will be looking at as this week unfolds to see what this pullback, if it's going to happen, looks like. And as I said earlier, I expect that the probabilities this week are the greatest for some sort of a retrace finally off this huge, spectacular move to the top side. So that's the indexes. So no failures, nothing yet in the cards telling us we're going to get a failure, but you definitely have other existential, if you will, things out there that suggest this may be the week that we finally see some sort of a pullback. IBB breaks over a swing point high, broke over it here, did a full retest, regen off the prior swing point high as well, held it. This is a weekly. I'm looking at weeklies. Gets back over the highs, right? It's fading back in. If you look at it the daily, you also have a fade back in here. It tested on higher volume on Friday. I suspect it's going to come in deeper. This one has a breakout, no retest regens. That regen would be after 6 bars. High probability it gets bought. That high is 280.07. I expect that's probably where it's going to try to test to if it's going to. So if we get a continued retrace here, 280.07. If I look over here at the top of this one's 275, and this top here is about 280.07. So that's where it's going to try to come back into where that congestion was on the prior move up. Flipping through some more of these, IYT, just no pullback yet, just like some of the others. The SOX has actually done a little bit of consolidation up here. It looks like it's going to try to go after the highs at some point. If you look at it on a daily basis, you can see here how this one has traded, sideways for 2 weeks now. So that's certainly enough time to get it to the point where it tries to move higher. We saw some continued rotation. I talked about rotation last week. XLB is one of them. Rotation into this sector. The one that really can't get the rotation yet is the XLE, though it won't give it up and is leaving long tails, telling me that more than likely it's probably seen its lows for now and it is going to get some rotation here pretty soon. XLF, some money came out of it, does over, under, up, over, back, under. This one wants to pull back, retest, regen off this swing point high. So again, here's a case where you've gone over, you're coming back in within 6 bars. That retest is probably going to get to the bottom of it, or at least try to. That price point's about 23.35. XLI, same sort of idea. Over the top, it did hold though, but it also is trying to flatten out and come back. So what's happening is you're getting rotation into sectors that have been a little weaker, out of those sectors that have pushed straight up without any kind of retrace. And then there's a few of these like technology which actually consolidated for a week and then pushed up this week, and you can see it more clearly here on the daily. So I don't see anything in any of these sectors or the indexes that suggests that this market's going to fail. But what you can see is you can see some weakness, maybe that's the best way to say it, in the Russell. And the Russell, of course, has been the best indicator on the downside, so that is a concerning point. The other part of it is you had 4 straight weeks up, no retrace. Usually, a decent leg on a daily chart can take you 7, 8, 9 weeks. Usually about halfway through that is where you start to see, on a very strong move, which is what we have, is where you see some sort of profit taking, consolidation, pullback. That's where we are. And so when I look at it from those standpoints, and then I look at it from the standpoint of the calendar itself, you're at a point where it makes sense. If you're going to get some sort of a retrace, it makes sense right here. So I don't see technically anything when I see the other ancillary type notions that are out there, right? This would make sense as to the place, and so that's why I say that. Okay, so that's it for the indexes. I mean, I don't see anything here technically that says it's going to pull back. At the same time, I realize that if it's going to happen, this is probably where it's going to be. If I look in the OX markets, there is one signal there, along with like the Russell that we're talking about. And again, there's no failures yet, but if I look at the bonds, if I look at the TLT in particular, TLT's coming back in over this high, it's testing into it. But if I bring up the daily and look at the daily itself, you know, what I see on this daily chart is kind of this fade back in, rolling around, kind of curving around, right, trying to go back up. And that looks like what it's trying to do. There was a retest, regenerate off this prior high, got under it 1 bar, but other than that, it has held. And it's right at the top of this swing point high now as of Friday. This looks to me like it's going to try to run back the other way, test into this swing point high, and if it does, you know, I suspect it's going to test into that resistance zone. And then that's where you're going to find, is it really going to make a run higher and come all the way back up and test those spike highs now, or is it going to range trade in this area for a while? TLT usually runs contrary, right? At least it has this year, to equities. So that's one other subtle sign of the potential for some sort of a retrace here. Dollar, been a big deal. Dollar actually failed on Friday, goes over, back under, less volume. On a daily basis, looks like it's going to try to retrace. If you look at it on a weekly basis, still very strong. But yes, it can come back into that 23, 23.10 area and do some more consolidation and testing. If I look overseas, really nothing there. Range trades all across the board. And so that's, you know, in a nutshell, that's kind of where we are as of, you know, what it looked like last week and probably what this week is going to look like. So I had a few questions. I'm going to pop in and take those. It may be a little bit short of a session tonight. I've been on the road, so I haven't been able to prepare anything. But let me pop in here and look at some of the questions that were asked as of some of the members and viewers. So the first one has to do with Gilead Sciences. I'm looking at a weekly chart here, so you can see the consolidation now that's been taking place off this big swing point high, wide volume, you know, heavy, well, wide price spread, kind of heavy volume bar. Test underneath it here with big volume, right? Test over the top, and over that top there, it doesn't have the volume. Now it's back inside of it. Looks like it's going to try to test the back side, the bottom side of that range as it builds out this range. Note that this had already done an ABCD structure to the upside. That was a good one, right? It carried it up and passed, and now it's consolidating up in this area. That's on a weekly chart. If I pull over the daily chart, right, there's an ABCD structure to the downside. That ABCD structure is here, back up, back down, a little bit farther to go, about 98 or so. If I look at it and I see this big bar over here, that looks to be the target. Looks to me like it's trying to get down into the top of this low, which is the low of this spike down. So that looks to be the kind of target. The question on Gilead was, it looks like it's setting up for a potential ABCD structure to the upside, and that was on the daily chart. And so, what I assume that they're looking at here, and for me, it's a little bit different because I take this high, right, that low, and then take it back up. Well, it hasn't worked out that way. So instead, what you have is you have the other one set up, ABCD structure to the downside, it takes it back to here. So I don't see it, on this chart. If I come over and look at it here, I think it's a range trade. I think the real question is, how long is it going to range trade, and what's that breakout going to look like when it does? If I take the top and bottom of that big range, so if it trades down into here, for example, then I would start thinking the larger part of the range. That's a large range. It's about 92 up to about 117 or so. So it's about 25 points or so. So a breakout up or down, 25 points is a big move. 25 to the downside, 25 to the upside. So that's going to be the big key at some point, which way it wants to break out of the range. Now, one thing I would look at is I wouldn't look at this in isolation. I would go over and look at the IBB itself, which it trades in, is one of the heaviest weightings. And that has a breakout here and a full retest regen already on that prior high. Then it spurts higher. Now it's trying to come back. In my view, when I look at this, you actually had, and let's do it a different way here, you actually had a little ABCD structure from here that went to there, back down, and back up, and it's finished it. So it makes sense for it to range trade at these highs. And so if I think about it from that perspective, I think it could be a little while it range trades here, and then eventually potentially sets up the next breakout to the top side. And so I think what you really want to do, if you're bullish this group, which you clearly are, is you want to watch this daily chart and let it come back in a little bit farther, on the daily to do the retest regen off this prior high. So that prior high, it's been more than 6 bars. This is the place it's probably going to get bought, as we were just talking about in the prior slide. That's where I'd be focused on buying into anything that's IBB related. And so if I'm looking at Gilead again, as the IBB comes back into that price point, I'm assuming it's going to end up at these price points, and that's probably going to be your buy. So that's where Gilead is. That's the way I see it. Let's pop into another question. This one has to do with precision cast parts. This is the daily chart. So the question here, let me find the question real quick. Here we go. Lower, it appears to be in its lower range on the weekly and near support on the monthly. So the lower weekly range appears to be showing on the daily, where it seemed to be trapped. The earnings spike down in October was bought, confirming does that confirm the bottom? And so the earnings, I didn't look this up again. I didn't have a lot of time, but I'm assuming that was this big wide price spread heavy volume bar. When I see something like that, my first thought is, okay, that's a range now. And as you can see, as it tests this top of this range, it's been unable to break over it so far. So that, the first thing in my mind is that more than likely you're going to see this thing pull back, especially if this market does, pull back in here and test into the lower end of this range. at least into the support zone probably, and maybe even test the lows again because you got a high volume low. So that's the first thing I see and that I would think. And so yeah, it's a good sign that they bought it, but I don't know, given the way this has worked, I don't know that it's going to break out yet. It doesn't, matter of fact, it doesn't look like it's going to break out yet. Let's take that, hold that thought, and move to the weekly. Now the weekly has a break under this swing point low. You can see it here. It's suspect, didn't have the volume, but it got underneath it. That's this bar. This is the low. That's a retest, regenerate, bearish, right? A bearish retest, regenerate. What does that mean? Well, that means that until I see it trade up here over that low, then I have to respect the fact that it's still a downtrend. And if I look at this on a weekly basis, it is a downtrend. You can see an ABCD structure here that completes, right? Then you can see the next one, right, that completed, right? That was that one. And now you're getting a bounce, which what? Potentially, let's just say it goes all the way back to that high of that low, potentially sets up another ABCD structure to the downside. So when I look at this, I really want to see it trade over this area to tell me that this downtrend is over. Because right now, I've got a bearish trend on this time frame. And so when I look at, precision auto cast parts, I'm not willing to assume that it's going to bounce back the other way. And if I pull over the monthly finally, the volume coming in on the monthly, much heavier than everything we've seen here before. This could trade down into these bars, the two bars here. Let me mark them for you. This one and into this one. So those highs, so the intersection of that is about into there. We could certainly trade back down into that area. So I'd be very careful here and make this chart prove itself. So in other words, if I was going to do anything on the upside, I would certainly wait until here to buy it with a stop underneath this big high volume low in case it does start to break lower. It's probably the best bet is to not assume it's going to break higher, but to wait. And to wait until on this weekly that bearish retest regenerate fails. That would give me the confidence that this thing probably is done on the downside, at least for now. So that's where that one is, and that's the way it looks. Last one is one that I highlighted either last week or the week before. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. They had earnings. This is Titan. It's Titan Medical out of Ontario, I believe. I forget exactly where they're based. I could probably look it up, but I'm not going to spend my time doing that. What I wanted to do is to focus on them because they had earnings. And let me pull over the daily, and you can see what happened to them. So this was a tight consolidation. You had a break here, bearish downtrend, broke two swing point lows, but it had not at the time broken on the weekly. Right, and so I kind of discounted it, and I actually thought the way it was holding that it was probably going to make a spike back to the upside. Well, it didn't. It went to the downside, and it gapped down as well. So you had earnings come out before the open. It gaps down, right, and just runs all the stops, and then look where it traded back to, about halfway up. Now, what's interesting on this when I look at it, and I'm viewing it purely technically tonight. I haven't had a chance to even look at the earnings on this to see what they look like because I've been out of town. But when I get a chance this week, I'll review it one more time, and we'll actually have a few more days trading on it to look at it as well. But when I look at it on a weekly chart, on a monthly chart, I see some high volume spikes on the way up, and one of them happens to be right here. That low is about where this thing traded. And if you look at this and just pull it across, you've actually got this large range at the top. And it's still trading in that large range. And as a matter of fact, the spike down tested the bottom of the range and immediately was bought. And if we look at the actual numbers, that low 122, 126 is where it got to. And we're on a monthly here, and we're about halfway through. So we've done about 4.3 million. That bar up is 12 million. So you can see more than likely you're not going to do the volume on the test. That's a good thing if you're long this stock. That's telling you this stock is probably going to hold this higher range. And that's very important, because if it doesn't, the lower side of that range is quite a ways down, right? I mean, it's down at least to this low, which is 81 cents. And so, that could take you down, if I draw these out, I mean, I look at these range trades a lot. If I draw these out and take that as the top range, take that as the next one, right? And then the last one down here, that's not quite equidistance, but it's about even. I think that's kind of where the ranges line up. You definitely don't want to see it trade down here, stay down here. That would not be a good situation. So on a monthly, doesn't look too bad. On a daily, it looks horrible, but they bought it. On the weekly, it actually came into this low and has more volume. So what that tells me, that's that 122 low, that's the low on the monthly. What tells me, given the volume, is that this can and probably will trade in this range for a while. And if we do the range trades again and look at them on a weekly, you kind of got these two on a weekly basis. So this can definitely do some more testing down into the support zone. We're talking about a startup company. It's in its infancy. It has to find buyers willing to buy at the lower prices, and Friday's action looked like a run of the stops more than anything to me. But what I'd really like to see over the next 3 or 4 days is for that stock to tell me that's true. And how would it tell me that? Well, it would tell me in one of two ways. One is it just slowly climbs back up here and tries to get back up above and test these retest regens. That would actually be an amazing feat if it came all the way back up to this area. I don't expect that. What I expect is for it to trade in this range now for some period of time. And what I would prefer to see this week is that it closes at least where it is, or maybe a little bit higher, maybe trades in a range like that. In other words, I don't get an immediate spike down to test those lows. That would give me some confidence that the money, that what happened on Friday really was a run of the stops, and that you really have buyers down in this area. And so if it trades down there and gets bought, then that's going to tell me that in fact is true. And that's what I'd be looking for this week to give me some clue as to how this is probably going to trade on a longer term basis. Is it really going to hold that top range, and this is consolidation at the highest range on the monthly, or is something more sinister taking place? So with that said, I'll look at the earnings report in more detail as the week goes on. We'll see how this trades, and we'll come back and revisit it maybe Thursday on the Thursday night show. Okay? Well, that's it for tonight. I appreciate you joining me as always. Tell a friend, tell two. I'm LA. This is, and it was, your weekly NeoTA wrap. Have yourself a great night, a great week. Look for some sort of a pullback. I think this is the week you're going to see it if it's going to happen. And it's probably healthy if it does. Have a great one. Take care. Good night.